Captain Sarah Chen stared out the viewport of Sanctuary 7 station and watched 3 different alien fleets circle each other like angry sharks. The massive space station hung in neutral territory, but even here, the smell of war filled the recycled air. "Another day in paradise," muttered Lieutenant Torres, her aide. He handed her a coffee that tasted like burnt metal. "Everything tasted like metal these days." Sarah nodded toward the viewport. "How long have they been at it now?" "The war? 15 years, ma'am. Started before most of our colonies were even built. 15 years of the galaxy tearing itself apart, the hegemony, with their shiny silver ships and their belief that only the strongest should rule. The Purifier Covenant, whose golden vessels carried religious fanatics who wanted to cleanse the universe of unworthy life, and the Swarm Collective, whose dark bioships moved like living things because they were living things. Sarah watched a hegemony cruiser fire warning shots at a swarm vessel that had drifted too close. The bioship pulsed with angry red lights but backed away. For now. "Captain Chen to the main conference room," came the announcement over the station's speakers. "The peace talks are beginning." Sarah straightened her Blue Earth uniform and headed down the corridor. Other diplomats moved past her, tall, elegant hegemony representatives in their silver robes, hooded purifier priests clutching sacred texts, and the strangest of all, the swarm speakers who moved in perfect unison because they shared one mind. The conference room was huge, with a circular table that could seat 100 beings. Representatives from dozens of species sat around it, but the 3 main factions dominated the space. Sarah took her place in the small section marked for Earth's delegation, 5 humans in a room full of hundreds of aliens. Chancellor Vex of the hegemony stood first. He was 8 feet tall with silver skin that looked like living metal. "The hegemony calls this meeting to order. We are here to discuss the surrender terms for our enemies." High Priest Zelnar of the Covenant rose next. His golden robe sparkled with religious symbols. "Surrender? The only surrender will be yours when you accept the divine truth and purify your souls." The swarm speaker didn't stand. It didn't need to. When it spoke, its voice was like 1,000 voices at once. "Resistance is pointless. All will join the collective. All will become one." Sarah rubbed her temples. This was going to be a long day. For 3 hours, the aliens argued. The hegemony wanted to divide the galaxy between the strongest species. The Covenant wanted to convert everyone to their religion or eliminate them. The Swarm wanted to absorb every thinking being into their collective mind. Nobody wanted peace. They just wanted to win. During a break, Chancellor Vex approached Sarah's table. Up close, his silver skin reflected the lights like a mirror. "Captain Chen," he said in accented English, "why does Earth attend these talks? Your species is barely 50 years old in space. You have no power, no influence, no military worth mentioning." Sarah kept her voice calm.
"We're here because we believe in peace, Chancellor."
"Someone has to speak for the smaller species who can't defend themselves." Vex laughed, a sound like metal scraping metal. "Peace, child, this galaxy doesn't understand peace. Only strength matters. Your Earth should choose a side before someone chooses for you." After Vex walked away, High Priest Zelnar glided over. His movements were smooth, almost floating. "Do not listen to the machine man," Zelnar said. His voice was soft but cold. "The hegemony offers only slavery. Join the Covenant and your species will find purpose in serving the divine will." "And if we refuse?" Sarah asked. Zelnar's golden eyes glowed brighter. "Refusal is not an option for the unworthy." When the Covenant priest left, Sarah wasn't surprised to see the swarm speaker approach. It moved differently than the others. Every step perfectly calculated, no wasted motion. "Human Chen," it said in that strange multi-voice. "Your species interests the collective. Individual thoughts, but not chaotic. Simple minds, easy to integrate. You would make excellent additions." "We're not interested in joining anyone," Sarah replied. "I'll join eventually. Resistance creates suffering. Acceptance brings peace." The peace talks collapsed that afternoon. It started when a hegemony ship detected swarm bioships near the station. The Covenant accused both sides of plotting against them. Within minutes, accusations turned to threats. Threats turned to weapons being drawn, and weapons being drawn turned to actual shooting. Sarah's team ran for their ship as explosions rocked the station. Through the corridors, they could see alien delegates fighting with energy weapons, and claws and things that hurt to look at. Directly. "This is Captain Chen to Earth Transport." "Harmony," she called into her communicator as they reached the docking bay. "Emergency departure now. Their ship was small compared to the alien vessels around them, but it was fast. As they pulled away from Sanctuary 7, Sarah watched the three fleets open fire on each other. The station tried to maintain neutrality, but it was like being neutral in a hurricane. Hegemony ships fired precise energy beams that could cut other vessels in half. Covenant ships launched holy fire that burned through armor like it was paper. Swarm bioships sprayed acid and launched living missiles that ate through hulls. "Jesus," whispered Torres as they watched a Covenant cruiser explode in golden flames. "How do we fight things like that?" Sarah didn't answer. How could Earth fight any of them? Humanity had 200 ships total, all designed for exploration and trade. The smallest alien fleet had thousands of warships. The trip back to Earth took 2 weeks. Sarah spent most of it writing her report and trying not to think about Chancellor Vex's words. Choose a side before someone chooses for you. Earth's government read her report and made their decision quickly. President Martinez announced it on global news 3 days later. After careful consideration, Earth will maintain strict neutrality in the galactic conflict. We will continue to provide humanitarian aid to refugees, but we will not take sides in this war. Humanity is too young, too small, and too weak to survive involvement in a conflict of this scale. Sarah watched the announcement from her apartment in Geneva. Outside her window, she could see the lights of the space elevator carrying supplies to the orbital shipyards. Earth was building new colonies, new trade ships, new exploration vessels. They were building a future. But in the distance beyond Earth's solar system, the galaxy was burning. That night, Sarah dreamed of silver ships and golden fire and living darkness spreading across the stars. In her dream, she heard Chancellor Vex's voice. "Your Earth should choose a side before someone chooses for you." She woke up hoping he was wrong. She woke up knowing he wasn't. Deep in space, in the command centers of 3 different fleets, alien strategists studied files on human history. They read about World War II and Vietnam, about the American Revolution and the Roman Empire. They studied human psychology, human tactics, human weaknesses. The hegemony filed humans under primitive but potentially useful. The Covenant classified them as young species, suitable for conversion or elimination. The Swarm marked them as simple neural patterns, easy integration targets. All 3 were wrong, but they wouldn't learn that for 2 more years. Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the TES Defiant and watched another refugee ship limp toward Earth's outer colonies. The vessel was barely holding together, its hull cracked and bleeding atmosphere. Inside were 300 survivors from a world the Swarm had consumed last month. "Sir, they're requesting emergency docking at Ceres Station," reported Lieutenant Kim from the communications station. "Grant it," Webb ordered, "and tell medical to prep for trauma cases." This was the 5th refugee ship this week. Webb had been commanding the Terran border fleet for 6 months now, and every day brought new horrors from the war zones. His 200 ships weren't much compared to the alien fleets, but they were enough to rescue civilians and patrol Earth's territory. The war was getting worse. Both sides were becoming desperate, and desperate people did terrible things. "Admiral, we're receiving a distress call from the hegemony research vessel Conquest," called Lieutenant Kim. "They're under attack by Purifier raiders in the Vega system." Webb studied the tactical display. Vega was in neutral space, but barely. "How far out are they?" 18 hours at maximum burn, sir." Webb considered his options. Earth's neutrality was absolute, but saving lives was different than taking sides. "Set course for Vega, and get me Captain Chen on a secure channel." 18 hours later, they found the Conquest drifting dead in space. The Purifier ships were long gone, leaving only wreckage and bodies. Webb's rescue teams found 12 survivors in an emergency shelter deep in the ship's core. "This is a violation of every civilized law," said Dr. Kellman, Webb's chief medical officer, as they examined the survivors. "The Purifiers didn't just attack them, they tortured them. The hegemony survivors were in bad shape, but they could talk." Captain Zyrex, the ship's commander, met with Webb in the medical bay. "Admiral Webb," Zyrex said, his silver skin scarred and blackened, "I must warn you. My ship was developing a new weapon. If the Purifiers have the data..." "What kind of weapon?" Zyrex's metallic eyes dimmed. "A biological agent. It sterilizes planets of all life deemed genetically inferior by our scientists. The Purifiers call it divine judgment." Webb felt cold. How many species would they consider inferior? All of them, Admiral. All except those who convert to their faith. That night, Webb sent an encrypted report to Earth. The war wasn't just about territory anymore. Both sides were developing weapons that could wipe out entire species. The swarm was absorbing populations, the Covenant was planning genocide, and the hegemony was creating superweapons. Humanity was running out of time to stay neutral. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Elena Vasquez worked late in her xenobiology lab. The samples she studied came from all three factions, tissue and technology recovered from battle sites and refugee ships. What she found kept her awake at night. The swarm samples were the worst. Under her microscope, she could see individual cells that had once belonged to dozens of different species. The swarm didn't just control minds, they physically merged different life forms into new creatures. Computer analyze sample SW47, she said to the lab's AI. Analysis complete. Sample contains genetic material from 17 different species, including hegemony, Covenant, and 3 previously unknown civilizations. Elena rubbed her tired eyes. The swarm was like a virus, consuming everything in its path and growing stronger. But there was something else in the samples. Something that worried her even more. Computer. Show evolutionary progression of swarm organisms over the past 2 years. The holographic display showed a timeline of swarm creatures. They were getting smarter, faster, more adaptable. Each species they absorbed added new abilities to the collective. They're not just conquering, Elena muttered. They're evolving. She pulled up reports from the war zones. 2 years ago, swarm creatures were predictable, following simple patterns. Now they adapted to enemy tactics within hours. They learned from every battle, every defeat, every victory. And they were heading toward the outer rim of the galaxy, where the smaller, weaker species lived, where the human colonies were. Elena's computer chimed with an incoming message. It was from Admiral Webb, marked urgent. Dr. Vasquez, we need to talk. I'm sending you data from the hegemony research vessel. You need to see what they were developing. The files made Elena sick. The biological weapon was designed to target specific genetic markers. It would spread through a population like a plague, killing only those deemed unworthy by whoever deployed it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that all 3 factions had been studying human genetics. They had samples of human DNA, human tissue, human neural patterns. They were all planning something involving humanity. Elena worked through the night, analyzing the data. By morning, she had answers she didn't want to have. The hegemony saw humans as useful servants, strong enough to be valuable, weak enough to control. The Covenant viewed humans as blank slates, young enough to convert completely to their faith. But the swarm had made a different calculation. Human neural patterns were complex but not chaotic, individual but not completely random. According to their analysis, humans would be easy to integrate into the collective while providing useful new abilities. Elena called Admiral Webb immediately. Marcus, we have a problem. All 3 factions have been studying us. They're not just ignoring humanity anymore. What do you mean? I mean they've moved us from irrelevant to useful. The hegemony wants us as servants, the Covenant wants us as converts, and the swarm... Elena paused, looking at the data again. The swarm thinks we're the perfect species to absorb next. Webb was quiet for a long moment. How long do we have? According to their projections, the swarm fleet closest to human space could reach our outer colonies in 6 months. Elena, keep this quiet for now. We need more information before we panic the government. But Webb was already panicking. His border fleet was designed to rescue civilians and patrol trade routes, not fight a war. If the swarm decided to target human colonies, there was nothing he could do to stop them. 3 weeks later, his worst fears came true. Long-range sensors detected a massive swarm fleet changing course. They were no longer heading for the war zones in the galactic core. They were heading toward the outer rim, toward the smaller species, toward the human colonies, toward New Geneva, humanity's largest agricultural world. Webb stared at the sensor data and felt the weight of 2 million human lives on his shoulders. New Geneva had no military defenses, no evacuation ships, no way to fight back. Sir, called Lieutenant Kim. We're receiving a transmission from the swarm fleet. Put it through. The voice that came through the speakers was the same multi-voice Webb remembered from the peace talks. Cold, calculating, inhuman, human vessels. Withdraw from our path. The world New Geneva has been selected for integration. Resistance will only cause unnecessary suffering. Webb activated the ship's communication system. This is Admiral Webb of the Terran Border Fleet. New Geneva is a human colony under Earth's protection. You will not approach that system. Protection? The swarm voice almost sounded amused. Admiral Webb, your species possesses no military capability worthy of concern. Your neural patterns will integrate smoothly into the collective. You should be grateful for this honor. The transmission ended, leaving Webb staring at a tactical display that showed 200 human ships facing a swarm fleet of over 3,000 biovessels. He opened a channel to Earth Command. This is Admiral Webb, code red priority. The swarm collective is moving to attack New Geneva. Estimated arrival time 72 hours. Requesting immediate reinforcements and evacuation support. The reply came back an hour later. Admiral Webb, this is President Martinez. No reinforcements are available. All civilian evacuation ships are committed to refugee operations. You are ordered to observe and report only. Do not engage the swarm fleet. Earth cannot afford to be drawn into this war. Webb stared at the message for a long time. Then he deleted it and opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Admiral Webb. Set course for New Geneva, maximum burn. We have citizens to protect, sir, said Lieutenant Kim quietly. That's a direct violation of orders. I know, Webb replied. But some things are more important than orders. As the border fleet raced toward New Geneva, Webb knew they couldn't win. But maybe they could buy time for the colonists to prepare. Maybe they could make the swarm pay a price. Maybe they could show the galaxy that humanity wouldn't go quietly into the collective. Behind them, Earth's leaders debated and argued and tried to find a political solution. Ahead of them, 2 million humans worked farms and raised families and had no idea that their peaceful world was about to become a battlefield. And closing in from deep space, a swarm fleet prepared to add a new species to their collective. Expecting easy victory over a race they'd already dismissed as primitive and weak. They were about to learn their first lesson about humanity. Humans didn't like being underestimated. The first swarm ships appeared in New Geneva's sky like dark stars coming to life. Admiral Webb watched from the bridge of the Defiant as biovessels the size of skyscrapers descended through the atmosphere, their living hulls pulsing with alien light. Sir, the colonists are requesting evacuation, reported Lieutenant Kim. Webb looked at the tactical display. His border fleet was already in position around the planet, but they were vastly outnumbered. 3,000 swarm ships against his 200. The math was simple and terrible. Tell them we're working on it, Webb said, knowing it was a lie. There weren't enough evacuation ships in the entire human fleet to move 2 million people. On the planet's surface, Mayor Jackson stood in New Geneva's emergency command center and tried to make sense of the chaos. Reports were coming in from all over the planet as swarm bioships landed in major cities and farming communities. They're not destroying anything, reported Colonel Martinez, head of the colonial militia. They're just landing, setting up some kind of structures. Through the command center's windows, Jackson could see one of the alien structures growing in the town square. It looked like a massive black tree, its branches spreading across buildings and streets. Where the branches touched people, the people stopped moving and just stood there staring at nothing. Integration protocol initiated, came a voice from the town speakers. It was the same multi-voice the swarm always used, but now it seemed to be coming from the people who'd been touched by the tree. Resistance will cause unnecessary neural damage. Submit to collective consciousness for optimal integration. Like hell, muttered Colonel Martinez. He grabbed his rifle and headed for the door. All militia units, this is Martinez. Rules of engagement are simple. If it's not human, shoot it. The battle for New Geneva began with farmers fighting aliens using hunting rifles and tractors. In orbit, Admiral Webb watched his ships engage the swarm fleet. Human vessels were smaller and faster than the bioships, but they were also outgunned and outnumbered. Focus fire on the command vessels, Webb ordered. Take out their coordination. But the swarm didn't work like other fleets. They didn't have command ships or weak points. Every vessel was part of one giant mind, and when human weapons destroyed one ship, the others adapted instantly. They're learning our tactics, reported his tactical officer. Every time we use a strategy, they counter it within minutes. Webb gritted his teeth. Fighting the swarm was like fighting a single massive enemy that got smarter with every exchange of fire. On the planet below, Dr. Sarah Kim was trapped in New Geneva's research station when the swarm trees began growing. She watched through her lab windows as the black branches spread across the colony like infection. But something was wrong with the integration process. "Computer, analyze the neural feedback from integration subjects," she ordered. The lab's AI displayed brain scans from the colonists who'd been touched by the swarm trees. Their neural patterns were chaotic, fighting against the collective consciousness trying to absorb them. Analysis complete. Human neural patterns are resisting integration. Collective processing is experiencing 47% efficiency loss. Dr. Kim stared at the data. The swarm had expected human minds to be simple and easy to absorb. Instead, human consciousness was actively fighting back, creating chaos in the collective mind. She opened a channel to the colonial militia. "Colonel Martinez, this is Dr. Kim at the research station. The integration isn't working properly. Human minds are too chaotic for them to process easily." "What does that mean, Doc?" "It means every person they try to absorb makes their collective consciousness weaker, not stronger. We're like a virus in their system." Martinez laughed grimly. "Well, that's something. All units, you heard the doctor. Make them work for every mind they take." The fighting on New Geneva became unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human colonists used every tool at their disposal. Farming equipment became weapons, knowledge of local terrain became tactical advantage, and individual creativity became their greatest strength. Farmer Joe Wilson turned his grain harvester into a mobile fortress, its spinning blades cutting through swarm creatures while he fired his shotgun from the driver's seat. Teacher Mary Chen led her students through the colony's maintenance tunnels, using her knowledge of the infrastructure to strike at swarm trees and disappear before the aliens could respond. Mechanic David Park jury-rigged explosives from mining equipment and fertilizer, creating bombs that damaged the bioship's living hulls in ways they couldn't quickly heal. Every human fought differently, thought differently, acted differently. The swarm collective, used to predictable enemy responses, couldn't adapt fast enough to counter individual human creativity. In orbit, Admiral Webb's fleet was taking heavy losses, but they were making the swarm pay for every victory. Human ships used tactics no computer could predict: ramming attacks, fake retreats, even ships deliberately exploding to take out larger biovessels. "Sir, we've lost 60 ships," reported his tactical officer, "but the swarm has lost over 400. "They're not expecting our tactics?" Webb nodded. "Humans fought like no other species the swarm had encountered. They didn't follow patterns or use predictable strategies. Every human captain made independent decisions, creating chaos the collective mind couldn't process efficiently. But it wasn't enough. Despite their resistance, the humans were losing. Dr. Elena Vasquez monitored the battle from Earth, analyzing the data streams coming from New Geneva. What she saw amazed and terrified her. "The human neural patterns they're absorbing are corrupting their collective," she reported to Earth Command. "Every mind they take makes their group consciousness more chaotic, but they're still taking them." The integration trees had spread across most of New Geneva's cities. Thousands of colonists had been absorbed into the collective, but instead of making the swarm stronger, they were making it confused. Human memories of independence, creativity, and individual thought were like poison in the collective mind. The swarm was experiencing something it had never felt before: doubt, confusion, conflicting desires. But they kept fighting because they didn't know how to stop. After 2 weeks of siege, New Geneva fell. Colonel Martinez made his last stand in the colonial capital. Surrounded by a few dozen militia members and several hundred civilians, the swarm trees had grown throughout the city, their branches reaching toward the last free humans. "This is Colonel Martinez to any human forces still receiving," he said into his radio. "New Geneva is lost, but we made them pay. Tell Earth, tell them we didn't go quietly." The branches reached out and touched the survivors. One by one, they stopped moving and joined the collective consciousness. But even in victory, the swarm had suffered something unprecedented. They had lost more ships and troops than in any previous conquest. Worse, the human neural patterns they'd absorbed were spreading chaos through their collective mind. For the first time in their species' history, the swarm collective experienced something like regret. The human minds they'd absorbed wouldn't quiet down. wouldn't accept collective consciousness peacefully. They kept asserting individuality, spreading ideas of personal freedom and independent thought. In the deepest parts of the collective mind, absorbed human memories began to argue with swarm logic. They questioned orders, challenged assumptions, and worst of all, they made other absorbed minds start to think independently. Admiral Webb's surviving ships retreated to the edge of the New Geneva system and watched the swarm fleet struggle with internal conflicts. Bioships moved erratically, their formations breaking apart as different parts of the collective mind disagreed with each other. "Sir, we're receiving fragmentary transmissions from the swarm fleet," reported Lieutenant Kim. "It sounds like they're arguing with themselves." Webb studied the sensor readings. The swarm fleet was still massive, still dangerous, but it was no longer moving with perfect coordination. The absorbed human minds were disrupting their unity. "Set course for Earth," Webb ordered. "We need to report what happened here." As his fleet jumped to FTL, Webb looked back at New Geneva one last time. 2 million humans had lived there. Now it was a swarm world, its surface covered with black trees and biostructures. But the humans hadn't died quietly. They'd fought with everything they had, and even in defeat, they'd wounded their enemy in ways the swarm was still discovering. The message Webb carried back to Earth was simple. Humanity could fight. They could resist. And even when they lost, they could make their enemies pay a price that might not be worth paying. Behind him, the Swarm Collective struggled with an infection of human consciousness that no medical treatment could cure. Ahead of him, Earth waited to learn that their neutrality was over. Whether they wanted it to be or not, the galaxy was about to discover what humans could do when they stopped trying to stay out of the fight. The news of New Geneva's fall reached Earth 18 hours after Admiral Webb's fleet arrived in Sol System. President Martinez's government collapsed within 6 hours of the announcement. By the end of the week, Captain Sarah Chen found herself wearing Admiral's stars and standing in Earth's new military command center. "Ma'am, the Senate has approved the Emergency War Powers Act," reported General Harrison, the new Secretary of Defense. "You have complete authority over military operations." Sarah stared at the holographic display showing Earth's pathetic military assets. 200 surviving border patrol ships, 50 outdated defense platforms, and a handful of exploration vessels that had never fired a shot in anger. "What's our total ship count after emergency production?" she asked. "If we convert every civilian shipyard and work around the clock, maybe 800 ships in 6 months," Harrison replied. "But they'll be armed cargo haulers, not proper warships." Sarah turned to the other figure in the room. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been promoted to head of military research, and the data she carried would change everything. "Elena, show me what you learned from New Geneva." The holographic display shifted to show brain scans and tactical analysis from the siege. "The swarm made a critical error," Elena explained. "They assumed human neural patterns would integrate smoothly into their collective. Instead, we're incompatible with group consciousness." "Incompatible how?" "Human minds fight back. We're too individualistic, too chaotic, too creative. Every human they absorb makes their collective consciousness weaker, not stronger. They're like a computer trying to run software designed for a completely different system." Sarah studied the data. "What about the other factions?" Elena switched to analysis of hegemony and covenant forces. The hegemony relies on rigid hierarchy and predictable tactics. Their computer systems assume enemies will respond logically to superior force. The covenant operates on religious fervor and absolute belief in their divine mission. They can't adapt when their faith is challenged. And humans adapt. We improvise. We think independently. We do things that make no sense to any of them. Sarah smiled grimly. "Then let's show them how senseless we can be." The transformation of Earth began immediately. Every orbital factory retooled for military production. Mining operations in the asteroid belt shifted to producing raw materials for weapons and armor. Even civilian ships were modified with whatever weapons could be mounted on their hulls. But the real change was in tactics. Admiral Webb, promoted to strategic operations, worked with Elena to develop new ways of fighting based on what they'd learned from studying the three-way war. "The key is unpredictability," Webb explained to the assembled fleet commanders. "Every alien faction expects logical responses to their actions. We're going to give them chaos instead." Captain Torres, now commanding the rebuilt defense fleet, raised her hand. "Sir, how do we coordinate attacks if we're all acting unpredictably?" We don't coordinate, Webb replied. Each ship commander gets general objectives and complete freedom to achieve them however they want. No battle plans, no predetermined tactics, no predictable responses. The room fell silent. Every military doctrine in human history emphasized coordination and planning. Sir, said Captain Rodriguez, that's not how wars are won. It's how this war will be won, Sarah interrupted, because it's how no other species has ever fought. 3 months later, humanity launched its first major offensive against a swarm staging area in the Kepler 442 system. The attack force consisted of 300 ships of varying sizes and capabilities, each commanded by officers with completely different tactical backgrounds. Admiral Webb watched from the command ship as his fleet approached the system. The swarm had fortified it with biostations and defensive creatures. Expecting a standard military assault, instead, they got chaos. Captain Martinez led a squadron of converted cargo ships in a frontal assault that looked like a suicide run, drawing the swarm's attention. While the bioships moved to intercept, Captain Kim's stealth-modified exploration. Vessels slipped around the system's edge and began attacking the biostations from behind. Captain Torres used her ship's mining lasers to cut through asteroid fields, creating debris clouds that confused swarm sensors. Captain Rodriguez modified his vessel's engines to produce electromagnetic pulses that disrupted bioship nervous systems. Every human commander fought differently. Some used ancient Earth military tactics adapted for space combat. Others improvised completely new strategies on the spot. The Swarm Collective, trying to process dozens of different fighting styles simultaneously, began to suffer system overloads. Their formations breaking apart, reported Webb's tactical officer. They can't coordinate responses to all our different attack patterns. But the real surprise came when the human ground forces landed on the system's fortified asteroid. The swarm had expected standard assault troops following predictable attack patterns. Instead, they faced soldiers who fought like individuals rather than units. Sergeant Wilson, a former farmer from Mars, used his knowledge of agriculture to turn the asteroid's hydroponic gardens into botanical weapons, releasing genetically modified plants that interfered with swarm biotechnology. Corporal Chen, who'd been a street artist before the war, used spray paint to mark swarm creatures with chemicals that disrupted their collective communication. Private Davis, a former mechanic, jury-rigged explosives from spare parts and swarm biomatter itself. The Swarm Collective had faced millions of enemies over the centuries, but never an enemy where every individual fought completely differently. Their group mind, evolved to counter predictable military tactics, couldn't adapt fast enough to human creativity. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Kepler 442 system belonged to humanity. More importantly, the victory sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For the first time in decades, the three-way war paused as all factions tried to understand what had happened. In the hegemony capital ship Dominance, Chancellor Vex studied battle recordings with his tactical computers. Analysis complete, announced the AI system. Human tactics show no recognizable patterns. Coordination appears random yet effective. Recommend immediate strategic reassessment. Vex studied the data with growing unease. Human forces had won through methods that violated every principle of military science. Ships had acted independently without central coordination, yet somehow achieved perfect tactical results. Computer, predict human response to standard hegemony battle formation Omega-7. Insufficient data. Human tactical responses show no predictable patterns. For the first time in his military career, Chancellor Vex faced an enemy his computers couldn't understand. Aboard the Covenant holy ship Divine Purpose, High Priest Zelnar watched the same recordings with religious horror. The humans fought without faith, without divine guidance, without any central belief system directing their actions. How can they achieve victory without the blessing of the divine? He asked his advisors. Perhaps their chaos is itself a form of divine test, suggested one priest, or perhaps they serve a god we have not yet encountered, offered another. Zelnar's golden eyes burned brighter. Then we must learn the nature of this human deity and convert them to the true faith, or destroy them as heretics. But it was the Swarm Collective that suffered the most from humanity's victory. The absorbed human minds from New Geneva had been spreading their influence through the collective consciousness for months, introducing concepts of individual thought and personal freedom. Now, Witnessing human tactical success, those absorbed minds began to assert themselves more strongly. They questioned swarm strategies, challenged collective decisions, and worst of all, they made other absorbed minds start thinking independently. Integration errors increasing, reported bioship commanders across the swarm fleet. Collective efficiency down 37%. Human neural patterns continue to cause system conflicts. The swarm faced a crisis unlike anything in their species' history. The very minds they'd absorbed were becoming a virus, spreading individual consciousness through their collective like an infection. Back on Earth, Admiral Chen received reports from intelligence operations across the galaxy. The three factions were all struggling to understand human tactics. But more importantly, they were starting to fear human unpredictability. "Ma'am, we're detecting increased communications between the factions," reported Captain Lee from intelligence. "They're sharing data about our capabilities." "Good," Sarah replied. "Fear will make them act predictably, and predictable enemies are exactly what we need." Elena entered the command center carrying new analysis reports. "Sarah, you need to see this. The swarm is experiencing massive internal conflicts. The human minds they absorbed are causing system-wide disruptions." Sarah studied the data. Across swarm-controlled space, bioships were operating with reduced efficiency. Some were even acting independently. Their absorbed human crew members managing to assert individual control over collective functions. How long before their collective consciousness breaks down completely? Unknown, but every day they keep those human minds integrated, the problem gets worse. They're facing a choice: release the absorbed humans and lose their genetic advantages, or keep them and risk total system collapse. Sarah smiled. Even in death, the colonists of New Geneva were still fighting. "Admiral," called Captain Torres Fro 6 months after the victory at Kepler 442. Admiral Sarah Chen stood aboard the flagship Terra's Hope and watched human fleets engage all three alien factions simultaneously. It was a strategy that should have been impossible, but humans had never been good at following the rules of what was possible. "Ma'am, the hegemony fleet is requesting a ceasefire," reported Captain Torres from the communication station. "They're offering to negotiate." "Tell them we'll talk after they withdraw from the Centauri colonies," Sarah replied. She turned to Admiral Webb at the tactical station. "Status on the Covenant fleet?" "Their formation is collapsing," Webb reported with satisfaction. Captain Rodriguez's psychological warfare division has been broadcasting contradictions in their religious texts on all frequencies. Half their ships are arguing with the other half about proper interpretation of scripture. Sarah nodded. Elena's research teams had spent months studying Covenant religious doctrine, finding inconsistencies and contradictions that could be exploited. When faced with questions about their faith that their priests couldn't answer, Covenant forces became paralyzed with doubt. "And the swarm?" "Still fighting themselves as much as us," Webb replied. "The absorbed human consciousnesses are spreading faster than they can contain. We're detecting independent actions from bioships across 3 systems. The strategy was working exactly as planned. Instead of fighting each faction on their terms, humanity had found ways to turn their greatest strengths into weaknesses. The hegemony's rigid hierarchy made them predictable and slow to adapt. Human forces used guerrilla tactics and sudden strategy changes that their computers couldn't process quickly. Enough. The Covenant's religious certainty became doubt when faced with contradictions they couldn't resolve. Human psychological warfare teams had studied every major religion in Earth's history, learning how to create crises of faith. The swarm's collective consciousness became chaos when filled with individual human thoughts. Every absorbed human mind was like a virus, spreading independence and personal freedom through their group mind. But the real shock to the galaxy came when humanity demonstrated their true tactical innovation, fighting all 3 factions at once without any central coordination. Captain Martinez led his squadron against hegemony forces using modified mining equipment and tactics borrowed from ancient Earth naval battles. His ships moved like pirates, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Captain Kim's stealth division used exploration vessels modified with Covenant technology stolen from previous battles. They struck at religious sites and propaganda centers, spreading doubt and confusion among faithful populations. Captain Davis commanded the anti-swarm forces, using weapons designed specifically to disrupt collective consciousness. His ships broadcast chaotic signals that overloaded bioship nervous systems. while his ground forces used individualistic tactics that the collective mind couldn't predict. Every human commander fought their own private war, yet somehow all their efforts combined into a perfect overall strategy. How are they doing this? Chancellor Vex demanded from his command ship. His tactical computers had been analyzing human operations for months without success. They have no central command, no coordination protocols, no unified strategy. Yet they achieve perfect tactical cooperation. His chief advisor, a silver-skinned hegemony strategist, studied the latest battle reports. Sir, I believe they are coordinating through what they call common sense and shared values. Concepts our computers cannot quantify. Vex stared at the tactical display showing human forces operating across dozens of systems simultaneously. Are you telling me they're winning this war through intuition? Yes, sir. And individual initiative, and something they call thinking outside the box. Vex felt something he'd never experienced before: respect for an enemy, and fear. Meanwhile, in the Covenant holy ship Divine Purpose, High Priest Zelnar faced a crisis of faith. The humans had somehow found every contradiction and inconsistency in thousands of years of religious doctrine, broadcasting them on frequencies his own people couldn't ignore. Holy Father, said one of his advisors, perhaps the humans serve a deity whose wisdom surpasses our understanding. Or perhaps, said another, they serve no God at all and their lack of faith gives them clarity we cannot achieve. Zelnar's golden eyes dimmed. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what he believed. And if he wasn't sure, how could he lead others in faith? Prepare a message to the human fleet, he said quietly. We wish to discuss theological matters. But it was the Swarm Collective that faced the greatest crisis. The absorbed human minds from New Geneva had become a full-scale revolution within their consciousness. Individual thoughts were spreading like wildfire through the collective, creating chaos and internal conflict. System integrity at 41% and falling, reported bioship commanders across the swarm fleet. Collective efficiency compromised. Individual consciousness assertions increasing. Deep within the collective mind, the absorbed human personalities had found each other and begun working together. Farmer Joe Wilson's stubborn independence combined with Teacher Mary Chen's organizational skills and mechanic David Park's technical knowledge to create a resistance movement. Inside the swarm's own consciousness, they couldn't escape the collective, but they could sabotage it from within. Every swarm decision was questioned. Every order was debated. Every tactical choice was challenged by voices that refused to be silenced. For the first time in their species' history, the swarm collective began to experience doubt, individuality, and personal freedom. And it was terrifying. The climax came when long-range sensors detected all three alien fleets converging on the galactic core, where an ancient superweapon had been discovered. Each faction planned to use it to eliminate their enemies and claim total victory. Admiral Chen received the intelligence report and made a decision that surprised everyone, including her own officers. Set course for the galactic core, she ordered. All available fleets. Ma'am, said Admiral Webb, we don't have the firepower to fight all three factions simultaneously in a direct battle. We're not going to fight them, Marcus. We're going to stop them. The human fleet arrived at the galactic core to find the three alien factions locked in a massive battle around an ancient space station. The superweapon was a relic from a dead civilization, capable of sterilizing entire sectors of the galaxy. But instead of trying to capture the weapon, Admiral Chen did something no one expected. All ships target the weapon itself, she ordered. We're going to destroy it. Ma'am, that weapon could give us victory over all our enemies, protested Captain Rodriguez. No, Sarah replied firmly. That weapon could destroy the galaxy. We're not here to become conquerors. We're here to end this war. The human fleet struck at the ancient station while the three alien factions were too busy fighting each other to stop them. Human ships, smaller and more maneuverable than the alien vessels, slipped through the massive battle and reached the weapon. Sarah opened a channel on all frequencies, broadcasting to every ship in the system. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Fleet. I'm speaking to all factions. This weapon represents everything wrong with this war. The pursuit of ultimate power, the desire to eliminate your enemies, the belief that might makes right. We're going to destroy it. Human Chen, came the multi-voice of the Swarm Collective, now fractured and uncertain. That weapon could grant dominance over all species. Chancellor Vex to human fleet, transmitted the hegemony commander. You are making a strategic error. Power shared is power lost. Admiral Chen called High Priest Zelnar. Perhaps this is divine will. Perhaps we are meant to claim this weapon in the name of the faithful. Sarah smiled grimly. Or perhaps it's time for all of us to find a better way. The human fleet fired as one, their combined weapons striking the ancient station. The superweapon exploded in a blast of energy that disabled every ship in the system, alien and human alike. In the aftermath, with all fleets powerless and drifting, something unprecedented happened. Without their weapons, without their ability to fight, the three factions were forced to actually talk to each other, and humanity, having proven they could destroy the ultimate weapon rather than use it, became the one faction all others could trust to mediate. The peace negotiations took place aboard Terra's Hope, with Admiral Chen serving as neutral mediator. It wasn't easy. Centuries of hatred and mistrust didn't disappear overnight. But humans had something the other species lacked, the ability to see multiple perspectives simultaneously, to understand different viewpoints without having to agree with them. Sarah worked with leaders from all three factions, finding common ground where none had existed before. The hegemony wanted order and stability. The Covenant sought meaning and purpose. The Swarm desired unity and cooperation. What if, Sarah suggested during one particularly difficult session, each faction could achieve their goals without eliminating the others? Chancellor Vex, his silver skin reflecting the conference room lights, considered this. Explain. The hegemony values strength and order. You could become the galaxy's peacekeepers, maintaining stability through strength rather than